25 so years, yep.
So with that, it's just my pleasure to introduce Tara Heaton.
Thank you. That was so sweet. I'm glad I'm here. Thank you again, Connie. This is going to be fun, I can already tell, because I love your casual, spirited energy, so thank you for that. Sometimes I go into some really formal settings, so we're going to have some fun. I want to kick us off with a question. How many times...
Did it.
Good. That will be our go-to answer with any question. If we're not sure, Curtis did it. How many of you have occasion where you have to give a speech to a small committee, a large audience, or even sit down with somebody and try to convince somebody one-on-one to see things your way? Do you ever find yourself in that setting? Cool. That's what I was hoping you'd say. So what I plan to do today is give you a good bit of information about my platform, but more important than that, I want to give you something that you can remember and take with you and use immediately. I want to bring some value to you all. So before I tell you about how I developed Talk to the Brain, I want to ask you this question, because I bet a lot of you all have been given presentations and speeches intermittently, if not quite often, for years and years. Well, things have changed dramatically over the past decade. It is more challenging and more difficult today than ever before to hold people's attention. And if you think about it, you know exactly why that is. Why is it?
Phone.
That's exactly right. So there's 3 parts to this answer, though. Curtis did not do it. He's only part of it. So we know that if I'm boring, you've got your phone and you can pull it out and start scrolling through Facebook, right? So it's a safety mechanism. And if you sit down and listen to anything or anybody, you know that you always have a backup if you're bored. Our brains fear boredom today more than ever before. But what about this? Okay, does anybody in here have a daughter or a grandchild or a son, somebody away at college? Anybody? All right, what's that young person's name? Sean. Okay, so if you're sitting here listening to my very compelling talk, and we all kind of do this, we put our phone down and we put the back up, and then we go like this every once in a while, right? Just checking to see if maybe anything's going on. And on the phone it says from Sean, "Call me now." What happens to your ability to listen to what I'm saying? Sean wins, right? I don't care how interesting what I have to say is. If you see a text message like that, if my daughter, my youngest daughter, lives halfway around the world, if I see a message that says call me, I am completely, oh my gosh, what can be wrong? Something's wrong, she needs me, what could it be? And we lose that, right? So with these 2 facts about the distraction of cell phones, our brain is actually being trained to constantly multitask, and we have less and less ability today to really listen to messages. So I'm really hoping that what I share with you all today, even if you're a super accomplished speaker and presenter or salesperson or anything in that realm, that what I'm going to share with you today will resonate with you a little bit and be helpful to help you to amp up your game and elevate your game going forward. I would like to start us off with a story about how I came to develop Talk to the Brain. I was in the midst of a really rewarding sales career. 3 children, 14, 12, and 10. It was 2005, and actually on January 11th, 2005, my middle daughter, Caroline, who was 12 at the time, had her first of what turned out to be literally thousands of seizures over the past 15 years. She got what the CDC called a little virus of unknown etiology, and that caused her to have epilepsy. And so through the year of 2005, I am completely devoted to finding cures to her seizures. They kept giving her one medication after another medication, and nothing seemed to help her seizures. So throughout that year, it was right before Christmas, I will never forget this moment. We're sitting in Dr. Barbara Weissman's office at Emory Neurology. And I looked at Dr. Weissman and I said, "Look at Caroline. These seizures have terrible effects on who my little girl used to be. She was vibrant, she was social, she was athletic, and now she's unmotivated, she's depressed, she's just slumped over, staring down at a tennis shoe. I said, can we just take her off these medications, Dr. Weissman, and see if we can manage these seizures? And Dr. Weissman looked at me and she said, no, not in Caroline's case. Because the way her seizures travel damage her brain, her hippocampus specifically, which manages our memories and our ability to learn. So I went home that day, and that is what started 15 years of the study of the brain and neuroscience and human behavior. And as I studied this and continued to search this country over, and I mean literally this country over, Caroline's last seizure was last night. So I've never been able to really stop those seizures. And in so doing, her brain has become quite damaged, and she's very, very simple-minded, sweet young lady today. She's 27. So as I'm studying neuroscience and human behavior and the brain, I'm also watching my sweet angel's brain slowly just deteriorate. And as I'm studying neuroscience and human behavior, it just began to align with all of the teaching and coaching that I was doing in the communication world. So through this journey, and because I owe it to Caroline, I use what I've learned in hopes to help other people. So today, she is very simple-minded, and I say that with compassion, because what's interesting is what I've learned about the brain, she gives a very clear example to us every day. Every day. Her brain works just like yours and mine. It just does not have the same capacity. So she continues to give examples that help me to help other people to improve their authentic voice. And I'm going to share some of that with you. So what I'm going to offer today is a big overarching message about how we learn, especially in today's noisy world. And then I'm going to leave you with something very simple that you can remember and take with you, okay? So here's something interesting that will help us to wrap our brain around how the brain works. Okay. It was working. There we go. All right. As I mentioned, many years of studying the brain. And interestingly, here's something that I know and that seems to be completely true. About 2 years ago, we were living in Greenville, South Carolina, and we decided to move to Atlanta, Georgia. Back to Atlanta, where I have spent many, many years. There she is. So we decided to live in this joyful land of traffic so that we could be closer to Caroline's dad, because she's with her dad one week and then she comes back to me and she goes back and forth, okay? So we're looking for a house with no stairs that would meet all of our needs, because seizures and stairs, as you might imagine, don't really go too well together. We never really could find the right house. But what we did find was we found a home that had one downstairs, kind of a study that also could be a bedroom, and it had a full bathroom. I have a point here, I promise you. So we said, okay, that's the perfect house. So Caroline's bedroom would be downstairs and everybody else's would be upstairs. So get this. Every single week, Caroline, when she came back to my house, I would have to remind her, your bedroom is downstairs. She would start for the stairs, and I would remind her week after week after week. I'm not kidding you, this went on for 18 months. We finally gave up and moved her bedroom upstairs because she simply could not remember week in and week out that her bedroom was downstairs. Okay, but guess what she can remember? There we go. I have to get closer. She gets on the computer and she can put these puzzles together like a machine. And it doesn't matter how long it takes her, she knows how to work the computer and the clicker, and she can put these puzzles together over and over again. You know what else she can remember? She can't remember where her bedroom is, but she remembers all the way back in high school and middle school when kids started to bully her and hurt her feelings and ostracize her and make fun of her when she has seizures. She still remembers that. And guess what else she remembers? She remembers this. There she is. 5 years ago, she won a special needs talent show. And there she is. She still remembers that. Why do you think that is? Her brain, like I told you, her brain works just like ours, and she is a beautiful example of it. She cannot remember where her bedroom is because it's inconsequential to her. Our brain remembers pleasure and pain through emotion. That's how our brain decides to hold on to information. So our lesson is, when we're communicating with people, if we really want them to hold on to our message, we've got to find a way to connect emotionally, right? Because that's how the brain holds on to information. That's part of it. The other piece is application and repetition. So that's our big overarching message about how to improve our communications, whether we're speaking to thousands of people or a handful of people, is that we want to reach emotion, something that touches their heart, and then we want to apply it and repeat it, and that's how we learn, that's how we remember, and that's how we influence people's behavior. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, so moving along, if I can make this thing work. Our brain also needs something simple. More today than ever before, our brain needs to hold on to something simple. So if you remember the story of Caroline and you remember Gus, then you'll walk out of here having had a great lunch and having a little nugget that you can use next time you prepare a speech. So if you guys think you can remember Gus? Curtis?
Got it.
All right, Gus. Okay, now here's where it gets fun. There are 4 chemicals within our brain that delight us, that bring us joy and happiness. You don't need to remember the chemicals, but I'm going to just dip into them very briefly, each one, because they'll help us to really learn how to create those chemicals in the minds of our audience. I can see you straining. I'm going to show it in a bigger, it's just kind of a, it is kind of small. But we're going to dig into those one at a time. And what I have learned, and this is where it has just become so much fun sharing this with audiences and with sales teams. We have the ability to create these chemicals in the minds of our audience. And that's when we really make great connections. Now, I want to make something super, super clear, okay? By the time you get to be my age, typically you know what you stand for, you know what your values are. And my number one core value, this is just me, is sincerity. And I share that with you all because I never, ever want this to be inferred as something to manipulate people at all. It's quite the opposite. To me, life is too short to be anybody but who you are. And if we love the people that we're talking to enough and we care enough that we're taking their precious time, then we owe it to them to understand their brain and to serve their needs. And that's how I look at this information. That if you guys are sitting here and I'm taking your most valuable resource, that's your time. So I owe it to you to do my very best to understand the way your brain works. And that's how I look at this, okay? All right, so we're going to dig into each one of these briefly. Tell me about time, because I want to make sure that we get through this in a...
25 minutes? Yeah, it's 1 o'clock.
Oh, well, I can slow down. All right, let's dig into the first one. And I bet you have heard of dopamine. Who's heard of it? It's a hot topic right now. Does anybody know why? Parkinson's. That is absolutely right. Now, that's not been very much in my study, but I know that Parkinson's and also serotonin are compromised for people with Parkinson's. Dopamine is a hot topic right now also because of what we just talked about. Not just the cell phone, but social media and video games. Social media and video games are an example of the addiction to dopamine. And when I say addiction, I'm not exaggerating. Dopamine is highly addictive and it's very temporary. So people think that dopamine is like, oh, when you win a race or when you finish the video game. It's not. Dopamine is that chemical that's infused in our brain when we're looking forward to something. It's that seeking in our mind. I'm going to tell you something embarrassing about me, but it's a great example of dopamine. I smoked cigarettes for about 15 years. That's the embarrassing thing. I don't do that anymore, but I did. And I would go all day working really hard in and out of buildings, and I never wanted my kids to know I smoked, and I never wanted anybody to know. So I didn't smoke all day long. But when things got really stressful at work, I could imagine myself sitting on my screened-in porch after everybody had gone to bed with a cup of decaf and my Marlboro Lights. And that would give me peace. That is just a perfect example of how dopamine works. Just to think about that reward was coming would give me some peace and joy. That's dopamine. Dopamine's highly, highly addictive. So if you have a young person who's playing a video game and you try to take it away from them, and in the middle of that game they go crazy because dopamine is infusing in their minds and they're seeking something. You know what they're seeking? They're seeking endorphins. And this is a little bit of a misconception how people see endorphins and dopamine. Dopamine is that addictive chemical that we feel that when we're after endorphins, which is a reward, right? So if you are on that video game and you finally get to the next level, or however that works, or when Caroline can sit there and play those puzzles forever, that's dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. And when she puts that last little puzzle piece in, it all comes together in this glorious picture. That's endorphins. That's reward. So I tell you, I'm going to take this back into the example of communication. I told you guys to remember Gus, right? And that should give you some relief that you don't have to worry about all this science. I hope you find it interesting and intriguing half as much as I do. But at the end, we have Gus, and Gus is going to help you to take this information and go apply it in your world. All right? You don't know what it is yet, but it's simple, and I promise you it's easy to remember. So how do we infuse dopamine and endorphins in a communication setting? Dopamine is intrigue, it's interest. So it's very important that, especially in the beginning of a presentation, that you do something or say something very novel, very unusual, because that causes people to say, this is going to be different, this is going to be interesting, and it causes us to lean in. So something unique and novel in any kind of presentation is very, very useful to holding the attention of your audience. Also, when you offer a reward, that's endorphins. Does anybody know much about endorphins, how they're created in our body? Just forget communication for a minute.
Exercise.
That's exactly right. There's something called the runner's high. You guys have heard of that, right? I've heard of it. I've achieved it maybe twice in my whole life. Usually it's just misery for me, especially as a past smoker. So, but your body eventually will, especially for runners, it's a great explanation of it. When you get to that place where your body starts to feel pain, endorphins kick in, and you feel this sense of joy and euphoria. So spicy food can create endorphins. Spicy food can create endorphins, and anytime you're looking for some sort of relief or reward, orgasm creates endorphins. And a lot of people will say sex. Nope, sex is dopamine, orgasm is endorphins. You with me? How else? We can't do those things for our audience, right? How else can we give our audience some endorphins? There's something else that nobody's mentioned.
Laughter.
You got it. What's your name?
Wayne.
Wayne, that's right, like John Wayne. Laughter. If you have the ability to make your audience laugh, they will love you forever. That creates endorphins. But laughter is often called comedic what? What's the second word? When you give someone laughter, you give them comedic, starts with an R. You got it, relief. Endorphins, it's relief, that's what it is. So when you promise somebody that you're going to give them something simple, don't stress about remembering all this science, because we have Gus. That's a sense of relief. That's a little bit of endorphins. Does that make sense? All right, so we've got dopamine. We want to make sure that we're novel and we're interesting. We've got endorphins, which means a little piece of reward or relief. Now the next two are a little bit different, because dopamine and endorphins can be achieved all by yourself. Those are what Simon Sinek calls the selfish neurotransmitters. But there's two more that prove to us that we are meant to be a community. And the first of those two is serotonin. Serotonin is the feeling that you get when somebody compliments you. Somebody makes you feel confident and proud and joyful. And that can only come from human connection. So, how in the world would we do that for our audience? How would we make our audience feel proud and confident? That's exactly right. Yes. And somebody said something else. Compliment them. Right. So including them, complimenting them. Now, remember I said that sincerity is huge for me. So blowing sunshine is not the same as really offering specific, genuine compliment and reward. A really great way to do that is to validate the perspective of your audience, whether you're even in just like a one-on-one setting in a conversation, or if you're in a large setting. If you can stop and really challenge yourself to think, what could these people be thinking? Like, what are you guys thinking about? Who is this lady that came here to talk about Talk to the Brain? You know, if you can really understand, but typically in a setting, you're trying to influence behavior, you might be raising money for a nonprofit. So rather than waiting for people to challenge you in what you're sharing, the best thing to do is to embrace it and to say, I can imagine how you might feel. I can imagine what you might be thinking. I spoke to a big sales team about a year ago, and they had been through a terrible delivery season. They had been walking in and out of accounts trying to save the accounts because the manufacturing facility really blew it when it was game time. Now, I could have come to the sales meeting and I could have said, oh, you know, it's another year, you guys are going to be okay, keep your head up. They didn't want to hear that. They wanted to be honored and respected for what they'd been through. So rather than saying something like that, I said, you know, you guys have walked in and out of accounts. You've been up night after night, been on the road late at night, not being with your family, walking in, leaving your ego in the car, and asking for forgiveness over and over again. You've been through this for months. I can only imagine what that did to your spirit and to your family. And I want to thank you for showing up here after that. That's serotonin. I gave those folks serotonin. They thought, wow, she does get it. She understands what we've been through. So this is when we dig deep, when we're speaking to people, and we don't keep things on the surface, and we really embrace their perspective. The more you can learn about an audience, the more you can really relate to what they think. I have been challenged on this before. People have said to me, well, what if we don't agree with their perspective? What if we don't agree? We can't validate it. Sure you can. I don't agree with a lot of folks in political settings, but I seek to understand how they came to believe what they believe. That's validation. It's not agreeing with people, it's understanding how it is that they think how they think and they believe what they believe. That really gives serotonin. The fourth and most powerful of all of the neurotransmitters is oxytocin. Has anybody ever heard of this? Yes? Oxytocin is the love hormone. Now, I don't mean lust and I don't mean attraction. I'm talking about trust and bonding. And the reason why I say to you that oxytocin is the most powerful of all four of these is because it lasts the longest. It's got the most hormone functionalities. So here's where it really kind of makes sense to us, okay? Early on in relationships, in love relationships, do you remember that feeling? I kind of do, that little butterfly in your stomach. And you think when the next phone call is going to come. And you think when the next text is going to come through. And when you're going to see the person again. And you're all excited and you don't care about eating spicy food or doing anything else that might give you endorphins or dopamine because you are wildly falling in love, right? That's dopamine. That just constant excitement. Now here's what research shares with us. After about 2 years into any relationship, dopamine pretty much goes away. It's not novel and unique and new anymore, right? It's a little bit more predictable. So typically, relationships either will wither away after about 2 years when that dopamine's gone, or something else much more powerful has replaced it, and that's oxytocin. That's that place where you know this person, I trust them, I love them, I feel connected, they understand me. That is more powerful than dopamine. It lasts longer. And that is something that, believe it or not, we can give to our audience. The very best way to do that is to create trust. Now, trust and credibility to me are two different things. So I could stand before you and tell you all about the research that I've done about neuroscience, right, to prove my credibility. But that would be boring, right? And who cares? And what did Teddy Roosevelt say? Nobody cares how much you know until what? Until they know how much you care. Thank you, Deborah. That's exactly right. So it's much better to show people how much you care than how much you know. They're both important, especially when you're trying to influence minds. But to show people how much you care means that you're going to go deep and you're going to be honest and real. And I have a personal example of that. I have another talk that I give that that might not surprise you, and it's about the lessons that I've pulled from the journey of our family. And we have been on a journey like every one of us. But as I mentioned to you, I feel it is my duty to take that suffering and turn it to good. It's my job to give meaning to the suffering of my family. And so when I share this talk, something interesting has happened, and again, my learning just reinforced, wow. When I first used to share the journey of the family, I would brush over it, and I would tell about tough times, and I would just tell examples and generalities. We tend to do that because that's easy on us, but it's not fair to you all. So I used to say, well, there were so many examples of upsetting times when Caroline had seizures. Well, who cares, right? And then I realized that I had to take my own learning and apply it to my setting. For example, rather than saying there were so many times, I will share a moment. You know, there's a lot of talk about storytelling today and how powerful it is. This is why. But don't be confused between journey and story. We all have a journey, and guess what the journey is infused with? Hundreds of stories. It's those moments in time, those transformational moments that are memorable, that evoke emotion that people can recall. Like, I will never forget looking at Dr. Weissman and her saying, no, these seizures are damaging Caroline's brain. I'll never forget that moment. We were sitting on some bleachers. Caroline was about 14. She'd been having seizures for about 2 years. And we went to see her brother play football. And it was a hot, hot day. And we walk in, and my heart is just always pounding because at any moment I know she could go down. But she wanted to go. She wanted to see her friends. So we get there, and I look at the bleachers, and I knew what I was facing, but I just said, we got to sit on the bottom bleacher, Caroline. And so we sat down on the little hot bleachers, and we start to watch the ball game. And I'm holding the back of her shirt. And we're making it fine, and people are coming by and saying hello. And along comes a lady that I just absolutely adore, a lady named Kathy. And we had a really great connection. And she starts talking to me. And we start going into this really deep conversation about our kids and about what's going on. And I guess my hand loosened a little bit off from Caroline's shirt. And out of nowhere, she catapults into the gravel onto her face. And she's having a terrible seizure. So as you can imagine, everyone crowds around, there's blood coming down, and I just think, I can't believe, again, here I am sobbing. When I dig deep enough to share those painful moments with audiences, that's oxytocin. That's building trust. So sometimes you think you're telling a story, or we think we're sharing something, but we've got to take it to that moment in time and let people see how we feel. To tell people how we feel is one thing. I felt sad that day. It was really hard. But every time I think about talking about our family, I have to go there. I owe it to the audience. And like I said, that's another talk, and I've got some beautiful lessons that I share from those moments in time. But I tell you this because most of us have heard about the power of story. A story that really helps us to connect with audiences is a moment in time that was transformational in your life, and every single one of us has them, right? All right, so I'm going to wrap this up for you, okay? Wrap it up into so we've got a little, we've got the 4 chemicals, okay? The good news is, if this interests you, as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you all each one of my business cards, and I'll give you a code, and you can listen, you can download for free with this code my Talk to the Brain audiobook if this interests you. So don't stress on remembering these hormones or neurotransmitters. But I do want you to remember their purpose, okay? So we've got these 4 neurotransmitters that all create happiness and make people feel good. There's one more very important thing I want you to remember about communicating with efficacy. And it is this. Here's a simple example of the brain. At the very front of it is our neocortex, our prefrontal cortex. That's where the work takes place. That's how we remember things. And today, you all, more than ever before, our brain is infused with so much information and so much stimulation. When you're in the car, you've got the GPS going, the radio going, the phone is ringing. Wherever we are, I'm in the kitchen, I've got the Hey Google thing playing Adele, and Caroline's trying to talk to me, and I'm trying to think about a recipe, and my phone's going off. We all have that, right? Our brain is more stimulated than ever before, so it is absolutely so important that if you want folks to remember your message, that you give it to them in a very simple format. You've got to simplify it for them. If not, if I were to walk out right now, then I would just hope that maybe something of value stuck. Maybe something stuck, and maybe there's something that you can use. I didn't do the work to bring it all into a really simple message for you. Hope is not a strategy. This strategy is backed by science, but it comes straight from my heart. And that's the final piece of that. Simplify your message, frame it up for people, and give it to them on a platter, because that's what our brain needs. And I'm going to do that, I promise. Maybe without the screen. There we go. So here are 5 things that we've just learned. Honesty. Does anybody remember which neurotransmitter helps us to create honesty, or how we create honesty? It was the last one. Love, trust. Starts with an O.
Oxytocin.
Oxytocin, not Oxycontin. I think that's a drug.
That'll do it, too.
See results.
Right.
You gotta work it on.
Right. Honesty, that's one component that I want you to remember next time you have the opportunity to share with an audience. Another one is relief. Does anybody remember what that is? Remember the runner's high? What is that?
Dopey.
Endorphins. That's right, exactly right. So when we can either make our audience laugh or give them something that gives them some sense of relief, that's endorphins. It's the most challenging of the 4 neurotransmitters to create. How about validation? Does anybody remember that? When somebody feels prideful and confident because you've really embraced the way they see things.
Serotonin.
That's right, serotonin. Awesome. And then finally, novelty. That was the first one. When something's unique and it keeps us interested and intrigued and we're seeking for what comes next. Dopamine. That's right. The good news is you don't need to remember any of those. These 4 components are what I would encourage you to contribute to any talk. And then the last one we just talked about is simplicity, right? All right, so now I'm going to wrap this up into something I asked you guys to remember from the very beginning. Does anybody remember what that was?
Gus.
Gus. Right. It's a very simple acronym. And if you can remember Gus and these 3 words, next time you have the opportunity to give a presentation or even a talk or even convince your spouse to watch baseball, this will help you to make your message more compelling. What do you think the G might stand for?
Giving.
I like that, but that's not it.
Believe.
If you're honest,
Genuine.
So you want to be genuine, right? You want to be honest, you want to go deep, you want to tell those moments in time, those stories that really make a point. So you want to be genuine. What do you think the U is?
Understanding.
I love that too, but that's not it. Unique, that's it. Very good. You want to be unique. If you stand up and you say, "Hi, my name is Tara Heaton, I'm the founder of On Point Communication. Today I'm going to talk about blah, 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 blah," then your whole audience is going to be like, "Oh, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be, but thankfully I have my Facebook, so everything's good," right? We got to be unique so that people stay with us. We have to be unpredictable. So genuine, unique, and the last one was the last thing we talked about, and it's super important.
Simplify.
Simple, that's right. It's as simple as that. I hope that you will remember, Gus, next time you prepare to talk at church or in a committee meeting or when you're trying to raise money, in any setting, if you can push yourself to be more genuine, take the time to be genuine and to be unique and to keep it very, very simple, then you will have given your audience a gift. Does that make sense to you all? Because you're honoring the way their mind works. And all you really need to take with you today to have not wasted your time with me is Gus. Genuine, unique, and simple. One of my favorite quotes is by Maya Angelou. And I'm sure you've heard it. She says, people will forget what you said, and they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel. That was what Maya Angelou said. People will forget what you did, they will forget what you said, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. And they'll never forget the way you made them feel, especially when you do the work to tell them exactly what to do with that feeling. So making people feel good's great. But when you simplify it and you do the work for your audience, they'll never forget you and they'll leave with some value. So genuine, unique, and simple. I hope that helps you all. Next time you go to do any type of presentation or talk, I'm going to pass around my business cards and give you guys a code. And if you want to write it down, if this stuff is interesting to you, I go a lot deeper into this messaging on my audio. I have an ebook, and it's also in an audio version. And this code will allow you to download the audio version for free. So I'm going to get that for you right now. There you go. There you go. There you go.
Thank you.
Microbiology.
Thank you very much. That was awesome.
Tequila.
There you go.
There you go. All right, so if you have a pen, and you might even be able to remember this code, it's very easy. It's